as per our schedule, okay, today we're going to continue with our operations and the quality of operations, how to improve. Okay, so we have Steffen Weber with us today, and we will be targeting or discussing a quality management system within breeding programs. Steffen, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks for the opportunity to give this presentation. I'm also thrilled well to continue speaking to the IITA and CGIAR people from Africa after we concluded the Cassava project that you might have heard of, where we tackled advancement decision making. So, from my perspective, I'm based out of Sweden. I have a consulting company focusing on plant breeding and agriculture since 2020. And well, this is an exciting opportunity here to tell you a little bit from my experience out of the big agricultural corporate industry, where how basically we approached, especially partially in Syngenta, part of the well, the management of the quality around the processes that you run on the stations. So, quality management systems in breeding operations. When you look at why this is really important to think about how you do things, those are my three favorite quotes. The first one here from William Deming, an American statistician and quality management expert. He said, if you can describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. The other one is an American enterprise consultant, Karen Martin. She says, when we allow chaos to reign in organizations, we get random and unpredictable results. And the last one here, this is when you go and digitalize, so put your processes, enable them by an IT tool. This is a quote from a member of the Lufthansa board, Thorsten Dirks. When you digitize, well, a shitty process, you have a shitty digital process. And this is why it is important to think about processes from the get-go. Now, you have heard about the initiatives from John Derrera, I learned, and also from Yang Hua. So there is a big reorganization going on within 1CG. And this has another implication. So when you every big organization faces common challenges when they go through a reorganization like this. You start from silos. So right now you have all the centers, everything happens there, and now suddenly you're supposed to share stations across crops. Crops will be sharing centers, etc. So all organizations, they want to go at the end to what they call anchored agility. Now, starting from silos, the bad news is there is no shortcut. You go always from silos to chaos, through bureaucracy to agility. So you cannot go directly there. And some organizations, they get stuck half of the way, some go back. There's only very few that make it there. And how is this characterized? So when you have the silos, you have segregated processes, you have duplicated systems, you have isolated teams. When you go through the chaos phase, you have processes that are unaligned, your systems landscape is patchy, and your team and networking is actually undefined. Everything is in motion. When you go into the bureaucracy phase, you look at over standardized processes, you look at systems that are inflexible, and you look at formal committees. When you finally get where everybody wants to get, you have connected, harmonized processes, you have systems that are working in alignment with each other, and you have a structured cross-functional collaboration where you make decisions on what are we going to improve, what are we going to work on, what are we going to change. And when you look at the quality management systems and standard operating procedures, in the first case, when you have the silo phase, you do have SOPs and probably quality management systems in place, but they are unaligned and not scalable. When you're in the chaos phase, those SOPs, they are probably absent or broken. Systems are broken. In the bureaucracy phase, you start to re-establish SOPs and quality management systems. And in the anchored agile phase, you use SOPs and quality management systems on a routine basis. And the nice thing, they are scalable. They are scalable to other crops, to other centers, to across stations. So this is the big advantage of basically looking at things from a helicopter perspective. Now, everything you do to basically approach a good quality management system is you move an organization to organizational maturity. When you have an organization that is immature, you have a very reactive way of working. The ambiguity is high, and usually you do not have a great efficiency. When you go really, when you have a really good organizational maturity, you have a proactive way of working, and your way of working is actually visionary and efficient. How does this place? Well, in the reactive world, you're constantly firefighting, and you're hunting perceived quick wins. So let's do this because this looks good. Let's do this. Let's do that. In contrast, when you look at the mature organization, you do this in a well-informed way, in a reliable and structured way, and you manage your processes. So how do you get from this firefighting mode into the well-informed, into the mature mode? So basically, from my perspective, it's about 3 steps. First, you should define a process model for your organizations, for your operations. That means in the case of CG, it's a process model for plant breeding. Second, you establish trusted and mature networks of people, of experts that manage those processes across centers, across crops. And they manage and maintain that model and the architecture of the systems that support the processes. And then third, you start to develop a decision-making discipline around technology and continuous improvement efforts, where you use basically data to decide, are we going to make a continuous improvement intervention here or there? Because nowadays it probably happens mostly where leaders say, I think we could improve this one here, or I think we should improve that one here. Mostly not based on numbers. In a mature world, you have numbers where you can say, hey, those numbers here, they show me we should make an improvement here and there. And this is why KPIs and numbers are so important. Any questions so far? Well, if not, then let's look at some examples. I don't know if you are aware that I'm also leading the enterprise breeding system at the moment, the program to bring about new software. We're approaching a milestone, and you will probably soon see more of EBS coming through. In Africa, we have Wende Mengesha and Silvestro Meseca that are working, that are on the program here and helping us. But the enterprise breeding system will harmonize processes across crops and centers. It is actually the first system that really does that. BMS and other systems, they historically, breeders could basically tailor those systems to their specific needs. So this will somewhat change with EBS, because the intent of EBS is that at the end you want to be able to exchange data in standardized formats across, well, CG, across CG crops, but also with the NARS partners. So to bring such a this system about, this depends on CG establishing an anchored and cross-crop center process management. And you could also call this a quality management system. And it presents an opportunity to structure, model, and pilot such an anchored process management approach. Now, that was a lot of talking about why we need things, how this is basically structured, but to get more tangible, what you see here is an extract of the blueprint of the EBS system. And you heard me talking about the process model, you heard me talking about KPIs, you heard me talking about process maintenance networks, and everything together is basically reflected in the process documentation. You do not need to read all of this, but basically we have described for each of those capabilities here where we are today and where we need to be tomorrow. And when you remember the slide before, is to look at the breeding process model. This is supporting step number one of getting an organization to a higher maturity. The process performance measurement framework, the KPIs, this is step number 3 on the stairs. The process maintenance networks, this is basically step number 2 on that ladder that I showed you before. I probably should have switched that, but in terms of importance, it trickles down like this. And the process documentation is actually reflected in all three of those things. So documenting your processes in a standardized way is really important to make those 3 steps. And it is a key requirement for a quality management system. Now, if we look at number 1, the EBS breeding process model, and actually at the end it should not be an EBS breeding process model, it should be the process model for how 1CG does breeding. In the process model for breeding, you distinguish 2 types of processes. You have the end-to-end processes, from when you decide on a product concept until you basically hand the product or a candidate over to your NARS partners, and actually then also until they take it from the market. So all the way from making the design in the first cross until you take a product from the market, a seeds product. You start with managing your pipeline. You start in the early phases with molecular selection, and you have then you do phenotypic selection, and towards the end of that, before you hand off to basically commercialize a variety, you do product selection and you launch the product. So those are, from a time perspective, end-to-end processes. They can go over years. But then, you know this as station managers very well, you have another set of processes. Those are the operations processes, as we call it. And they recur every year in every breeding cycle. It's always the same. And in EBS, it looks like this. You have this breeding cycle, and you have the turquoise dots here. They are all about how experiments are set up. So all the processes that take you from advancement decisions to the planting lists. The green dots here, they are all about material production and logistics management processes. This is when you go from planting lists to creating new material. And then the dark green squares here, or the dots, they are all about data collection and data generation. So this is where you go from planting lists to observational data. So you see, you have 2 processes that go in parallel. Going from a planting list to either new material or observational data. For a breeding organization, there are 2 core assets that are important. One is germplasm, this is your material, and the other one is data. This is where you base your decisions on. And both of them, you want to be top-notch quality. Because if you have bad data, you cannot make good decisions. And in turn, you cannot produce good germplasm. This is the chain of events, and this is why it is important to really think about quality management. In this breeding cycle, at the stage gates, you probably are familiar with the stage plan. You have in between, you have your seed in your inventory, and before you take it out and select germplasm for a new cycle, for a new breeding cycle, you have a decision-making process where you go from data and the new material. So you know what data you have from the season, you have your new material, you look at all the data, you analyze it, and then you make decisions. What do you take to the next generation? That's what a breeder does. So this is the recurring process that recurs in every breeding cycle every year, and this cycle here repeats several times over the multi-years of the end-to-end processes. So this is a very, very high-level view of this breeding process model. We will need to break those processes down, and actually EBS is doing this partially by creating tools here. But as those tools will be harmonized across crops and centers, we need to have a mechanism where people get together from different crops and different centers and basically make decisions on, should we do it this way or should we do it that way? And this is where step 2, or the second step on the ladder, comes in. This is when we look at managing the process model through people. In the ideal world, and here you see this is a picture from the American Productivity and Quality Center, APQC. This is a model for this is a big organization that looked at thousands of organizations, how they organize themselves to manage processes. And this is what they found out, a general setup. You have on the one side the business, so these are the station leaders, but also the breeders, scientists in the organization. They sit all on the business management side. Here you should have people assigned being process owners. You might have process stewards who look at the smaller part of a process. You have subject matter experts, you have process champions, and at the end you have people who operate the process. Big organizations, they will actually need an entity that supports professionally with knowledge around process management those people in the business. It's called the process management function. And here you have process analysts. We have such people on the EBS program, process consultants, business analysts, and enterprise architects. So this is how organizations across the globe and across industry organize themselves to manage their processes. Now, what is the plan for 1CG? The plan is to establish process management networks, and you might very well end up in one of the parts of such a network. So we have the business management, as I said. Those are the people in the crops and the centers, and what is missing today is a process management function. But how that should look like at the global level, you would have probably some kind of a steering team that looks across all of the processes of this breeding process model. When you then break it down, and you have seen we distinguish two types of processes. We have end-to-end processes, and we have the recurring operations processes. You probably have different people sitting on a network team on this level. And then when you go to the crop and center level, well, on the end-to-end side, it probably will break down by crops, but on the operations side, it will probably break down by centers. So there will be a team for ERI, for CIMMYT, for EiB-IITA, and for any other organization, ideally, that all are then reporting up in this way. This is work in progress. At the moment, this is a plan. You will surely hear more from that going further down the road. Now, I told you about the documentation required. For this, we started within EBS a small project on documentation management. We will be testing a software to professionally manage process documentation. It's called a document management system. This is a small pilot project that is run at EiB. If it's successful, the plan is to scale this document management system to the other centers. So we will be looking at the few standard operating procedures that are important to the current deployment of EBS, and we will use a documentation management system to basically manage those documents, and then test it how this basically improves the management of those documents. Because when you have a good quality management system, you're not just writing a standard operating procedure. You probably an expert in the process will write this operating procedure, then it will need to be looked at, okay, is this appropriate? And at the end there should be an authorization. And from time to time, when you make improvements, of course this document should not sleep and rest somewhere in a cupboard or a drawer. You want this document to be living. So when you make an update to your process, you need to update the document. And this is the idea of using really a document management system. Now, what documents are we talking about? So I said I have been working with the Cassava team. With the Cassava team, we actually we documented the Cassava pipeline process onto the CG NARS stage plan. So down here you see what the Cassava team is doing, going through the 7 stages until product introduction. I don't know, maybe the one or the other have been part of this. What we do at EiB now within the EBS program is that we test managing standard operating procedures and reaping the benefits of doing this through a document management system. So here you see a screenshot of EiB's germination test standard operating procedure. Today they are handling a number of such documents via Google Drive. All updating happens manually. When you have to send around emails, people need to look at Google Drive to approve, etc. You can skip this with a document management system where you can automate many of those steps. And you see here the benefits of it. So first of all, using a document management system, you get an improved ability to comply with regulations. But then you increase your efficiency. So especially when it comes to editing and updating a document, you have a big advantage of a document management system. The same goes when you go for authorization of this, and when you want to scale. Imagine EBS brings about one process for each crop to plant and through the EBS system. You can have one standard operating procedure that then can be scaled to all the different stations. So you sit down station by station writing those procedures. You can just pull it from the system. And of course there's always the ability to make local adaptations, but in this way you have really managed it. You get a better reliability of your documents, and you reduce the risk of errors, of course. And why we are testing this in EBS, this is a huge enabler for bringing about change. So when you want to change something, it is always very good if you have your documentation very well structured and transparent. Okay, now I have talked about the process model. I have talked about the networks that should manage that model. I have started to talk about the documentation. Now, what about the measures, the KPIs? When you look at a research organization, it's driven, the value of it is driven basically by 3 factors. One is the inventiveness. So how inventive are you as a breeding organization? The other one is the relevance. If you are good at inventing, but what you are inventing is not relevant for customers, you invented in vain. So the performance of a breeding pipeline might be great in saying inventing new products, but if they are not relevant to the market, those products are, well, irrelevant. And the third driver is efficiency. And this is what you guys probably are all about. You want to make sure that doing the research work is done really, really efficiently. You can break those boxes down in more detail. When you look at the inventiveness for a breeding organization, this is basically genetic gain. For relevance, you look at how good are you at setting targets, how good are you at making decisions, how feasible is your testing setup, your trial network, and what is your product quality. When you look at efficiency, it's about how excellent are you in managing your people in your organization, how excellent are you at managing your operations, your compliance, and your IP. So this is about the measures. Now, an important thing to distinguish is lag measures and lead measures. So usually you go from output to benefit. So an output can be of EBS, for instance, a new functionality or a new method. If you think about what John Derrera told you about the breeding initiative, you think you will introduce new methods. You go from those outputs, you form a capability that can be a new technology or a new system like EBS. And once you have a capability and you put it into use, you start to realize outcomes, which means your processes get improved, your services get improved. And from those outcomes, you basically obtain the benefits, which are an increased genetic gain, an increased variety turnover, etc. Now, the problem with the last one here, when you look at genetic gain, when you see genetic gain results, there's nothing that you can do to improve that number while you are working. And this is why it is called a lag measure. It's much, but you can influence your processes because when you see something in your process not working correctly, you improve it. And this is where quality management system thinking comes in. And this is why it is called a lead measure. And lead measures often drive the lag measures. So there is a relationship. But the point about lead measures is they are directly actionable. So it makes sense to think in a structured way about what KPIs and what measures will we use to measure either how well we do our processes or our services, and what do we use to measure the big expectation on 1CG, improving genetic gain and improving the variety turnover. Now, you probably hear from my accent, I'm a German. When you go on a German Autobahn, there is no speed limit. Whereas anywhere else in the world you have speed limits. So, and this is a very good example to explain the difference between a metric and a KPI. So that your speed on a German Autobahn, where there is no speed limit, is just a metric. You can say I'm moving fast, but this is a personal or a subjective interpretation of the speed that you're traveling with or at. But when you have a speed limit, say 130 kilometers per hour, you can say, okay, your speed is a KPI because you don't want to get a speeding ticket. And suddenly you measure your performance against avoiding the cost of getting a speeding ticket. I hope this is an example that also illustrates that it makes sense to think about what is a metric, what is a KPI when you think about quality management systems. Because, as I said in the beginning, you want to manage your processes based on numbers, on metrics, on KPIs. So when you bring this all together, let me take you back to the three wise people that I showed you in the beginning. So we were talking about the three steps to go from an immature organization to a more mature organization. Step number one is to have a process model and to have standards around processes. Step two is to have networks that maintain and manage those processes. And step three is that you have a framework for how you measure what you're doing. So when you look at those quotes here, good old Edward Deming, William Deming, this is basically what he says about describing as a process, so you know what you do. This has to do pretty much with number one, and number 3. Um, the lady here, Karen Martin, when she says we need to avoid chaos in organizations, this is very much about the maintenance networks and the measurement framework. So to operate by basically agreed standards, by agreed rules of engagement. So you're not basically are running around like headless chicken and operating chaos. And this guy here, Thorsten Dirks, for his quote, all 3 of those things are important, because whatever you put into, well, whatever you hardwire in a software is actually at the end coming back the same way what you put in. What you put into a thing, and this is probably my end quote on quality management, determines your output. If you're putting in things that are not good, your output will not be good. And I guess you all know that. And with that, thank you very much, and I'll be very curious to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Steffen. Thank you so much. Questions for Steffen on quality management system?
Gustavo?
Oh, yeah, so it's not a question, Stefan, is a comment. So yesterday we had one session to discuss the components of breeding program. And the components when we discussed yesterday, we were thinking of breeding operations, or the component of breeding operations. We discussed many things on the quality, planting, harvesting, etc. And many discussed the importance of having strong SOPs, to have a clear and strong communication between the clients and the operational team. And many discussed also the importance of planning, etc. So it fits really well what everything that you said, that is how to manage these things, because one thing is what we want to have. We said yesterday that we want to have a strong communication, we want to have a strong SOP, we want to have good planning, but without having a process to maintain that, to structure these things, we'll run in circles. We'll go and try always to improve this communication, try always to improve the SOPs, etc. But these need to be sustained, and that's where the structuring system is important. Also, we learned yesterday, we discussed yesterday with Funiungwa, that these the N4AT initiatives on the one CGIAR, one of the work package, that is the work package 3, will be directly supporting the implementation of these under the CGIAR in general. Yeah, anyway, yeah, so just comments. Yeah, thanks a lot, Stefan. Good presentation.
Thank you, Gustavo. Well, if I were to summarize that comment in a simple statement, it's actually it is useful to have a process to manage your process. That is probably saying that in a nutshell. Thanks for the thumbs up.
Stefan, in the quadrant chart you showed at the beginning, if we can go back to that for a second. From an operational perspective, we are, as we say, individuals of action. So how can we avoid the lagging done in the bureaucratic phase?
Ah, this one here.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that is a good one. Well, you are all part of an organization. As an individual, you're actually pretty much dependent on what your organization does when they approach a change. So it is a bit like fighting windmills if you as an individual go about it. But I think you guys have started with working with Gustavo and Teresa. So what you can do, you can manage, or you can avoid chaos in your own world and this is where the continuous improvement thinking and mindset is helping you a big deal, because this mindset is actually helping you on, say, a local level to do what an organization should do on a regional and global level. I don't know, Sam, if this is a good enough answer for you, but really thinking about how can I structure my processes. Maybe in a way like this, you probably would not have a process model for your own station because you want this to be scalable. But this is something that you could do basically to discuss. Okay, where are we similar? Where can we basically avoid that we reinvent the wheel? Where does it make sense for us to talk to each other? Those are things that you can do in the first place. I hope this answered your question, Sam.
Yeah, yes, it does, actually. Another question is that for the operational process standards that you mentioned, are they, for example, shared, or is there a plan to share these? I mean, we are, for example, working on this with the One Rice initiative. Maybe Belko or Nana can comment on this as well, that we're trying to align our SOPs. We're gathering, collecting the SOPs from the rice breeding communities, okay, and we're trying to work out some common aspects of these for us to have one form of standardized, let's say, process, protocol, or SOPs for that matter.
Yeah. So as I said in EBS will harmonize processes. So this is why it's good to have a working example at ERI in place. ERI is quite well organized in this. I have been looking at their documentation, and I would suggest for this, please get in touch with May Ann Sellen and Sankalp Bosale. So both of them are part of the EBS team. Sankalp is the business change manager for Rice. He is also responsible in that role for Africa Rice. And Mayan is the implementation manager who works together with Sankalp to get, well, the documentation right, to get the training set up, and to help the data management, preparing the data for the migration. So those are the two people you should turn towards and for Africa Rice.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good question.
We have a question here from Alec.
Hi, Alec.
Hi, Stefan. Thanks for that wonderful presentation. Yeah, my question goes back to the same question that Amir asked about that chart. Like we have multiple stakeholders in EiB-IITA, and also we are spread out across different regions and hubs, so there are some cultural differences. How do we not necessarily speed up, but how do we smoothen the transition from a chaotic situation to at least speed up so that we become more agile? Like what would you advise us to focus on?
Okay. Well, I think you could think about using. Let me go into presentation mode. In the first place, you could look at for your operations processes, because this will be the future way how EBS will structure your processes. You could think across your community, who are the experts on seed preparation, on field mapping, on planting, on experiment management. So think about who are the experts who would then be the subject matter experts for those different things. So this is the thing you can already start. And then in the next step, you can think about, okay, given this structure, this process structure, how would this team for IITA look like? How would you organize across stations to manage those processes in a standard way. That and I'm happy to get in touch with you and work well and give you some advice and examples to how you could do this. So but this is my first line advice. Look at the processes that will be brought about by EBS, because this is how the future process landscape will be structured. Then think about who are the experts in those different steps, and then think about how you would organize them across your stations within EiB-IITA to form such a network. You might need to break this down further. There might be a fourth level where you break your operations PO team, process owner team, down further. But those are things that that are a design question. So that's the advice from my side.
Okay, thank you very much, Steffen. We basically don't have any more questions here. Okay, so thank you so much for the contribution and appreciate all the help you have provided.
Okay, well, thanks for inviting me, and good luck with your workshop.
Thank you so much. Gustavo, you had your hand raised. Is it an old raise or?
It was not an entire hand, it was just one part of my hand.